So I'm excited for this week, I won't lie. For the last 5 weeks, we've been doing different kinds of fantasy city maps so you can use them in your campaigns. We've done standard ancient cities, we've done fantastical cities, we've done city settings, we've done vertical cities / dwarven cities, and we've done an isolinear urban city map. And now finally, I'm going to marry the city map with another kind of map concept that I create, which is the naturalist map. For this map, I'm working with my friends from Conflux Creatures. They have asked me for a map, and I was more than happy to provide. That's thanks to them for working with me on a collaboration earlier this year. And what's more, we're adding in some ideas from another creator, which I'm very pleased to be working with, the Fluffy Folio. So this is a naturalist's map of the city of Axiom. It has several illustrations of the creatures that live there. And as I go through today and I create the map, I'm going to be talking about the processes that I use in order to draw it out, as well as how you can determine what animals live in your cities and why you need to consider the naturalism of your cities when you're making your TTRPG or D&D world building. So today we'll be going through the creation of the city of Axiom. Again, I'm going to shout out to Conflux Creatures and Fluffy Folio before I dive straight in and start talking about these processes. If you want to create an urban campaign, I would suggest watching this through so you can get more ideas of how to role play and world build for your players, flesh out your world, get a better understanding of what people can expect on the ground out of their campaigns. Now, this is, as I mentioned, the final video in the series that we've been doing recently, which is all about city maps. If you want to check them out, get an idea of how you can create your own city map, this is the first video that you've watched, welcome to the Red Quills. I do one of these tutorials every week on different topics and different styles of maps. So if you want to get an idea of what you can create, check out the rest of the videos. You can find them in the link above. So this is the final version of the map that we're going to be doing. As I normally do for commissions, I put a lot less writing in this so that it can be filled out by the dungeon master as they go through. So I'm going to try to communicate the ideas entirely in pictorial form. So, as we normally do, we will start with a large A2 piece of blank paper, and I'm going to make a sketch. In this case, I pre-did the sketch. Like most of the commissions, what I tend to do is I will do the sketch out first, take a photo of it, and then send it off so that it can be approved before I start painting. And in this case, there's going to be a lot of painting in this. I'm going to go through first and start painting out the individual naturalist sketches. They're only quite small. They're about 1 inch across for each of them, and they're the designs from the Fluffy Folio. I'll go through the individual ones that I've done here, and I've put the links to each of the creatures in the description below, so you can check out what the Fluffy Folio has created if you want to bring it into your own campaign. So one of the first things that I discussed when we were creating this map was dividing the city into different biomes, different areas in which different creatures would live, what they would subsist on, what their expectations would be in terms of population, and how they would integrate into the city life. So there are portions of this city in which very few people live. There are portions in which they're constantly living. There are abandoned areas. There are toxic areas. There are areas under the sea and areas on the land, places that are falling into the water, places above the Acropolis, and all of those different details lend themselves to different kinds of creatures living around it, and it's something to consider when you're creating your own map. So as I'm going to go through now, I'm just going to paint out the sea. Let's talk about, before I get into the fauna, let's talk about the flora, which I haven't explored in this map very much, but it is important for you to consider as well, particularly in cities that have shrunk over time or have been abandoned in certain places. The plants are the first thing that will become encroaching. So there's 3 categories that you can fit practically every urban plant into. It's whether it goes in a garden, whether it's a weed, or whether it's an encroaching plant. And so the idea is that plants are things that have been intentionally grown. Weeds are things that grow quite easily in this environment but are unintentional. And encroaching plants are things from the outside world that are slowly taking over the city. Larger plants, toxic plants, dangerous plants. So garden plants can be used for things like cooking or decoration. They have medicinal purpose. They can be used for insulation or filtration. Weeds, on the other hand, provide these functions, but they weren't intended to provide these functions. They grow in their cracks in roads. They're parasitical against energy sources or heat sources or light sources. You have molds in damp, dark places. You have fast growth in different seasonal times. And of course, you have choking plants and waterways and drainage systems, which can provide a sanitation problem for the city. And the encroaching one is interesting as well. We've got a portion of the city that has an encroaching biome on it. Those are plants which come from the outside, which can't be controlled. Weeds can be stepped over or just pulled out. Encroaching plants provide more of a problem. These are protective plants like thorned plants. They can be noxious or toxic. They can be animated plants or symbiotic plants which have a relationship with animals, or they can be allergenic, which I would consider to be an encroaching problem, even though it exists in most of our real-world modern cities. So you can see that I've gone through now, I've painted all the different fauna, and I've painted the ocean as well. I'm going to go through and erase a lot of the details so that I can paint as I go through, and I can start labeling and inking things as well. So now you can see that what I'm working on is, this is an abandoned part of the city that has a sort of a fungal cloud, a fungal spore taking it over. It's toxic to live in. There's a specific creature that lives there. It's called the marshmallow, and it's generally avoided for that reason. The rooftops above the spores can be used for clandestine meeting spots or high-risk ventures. So I'm just going to do like a brown layer under that with a few dotted spores of yellow or green to add a bit of mottling in there. And once that's done, I'm going to go through with this white pen. You can see this here. This is just a corrections pen or a white ink pen. You can find them at practically any office store. And I'm going to go through and add some highlights over the watercolors. I've actually found this is a great trick to give some depth to your sketches. Before I go in with the dark ink, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a thicker fine line on the outside. And by thicker, I mean that's at most 0.4, 0.3 millimeters. And then you go in with a thinner pen for the detailing on 0.1. And then the shading, which is a 0.05 millimeter, which I use cross-hatching for. So you can see that I use those three different kinds of pens as I go through to give the illustrations some depth. And the pens do need to be very fine in order to work on the scale that I'm working on, which is, as I said, less than an inch across for each of these illustrations. So I've got a lot of different tools that I can use to add in details to make things really, really pop. And honestly, the white ink pen, which is a recent addition to my arsenal, has been amazing to add that level of visual aesthetic. So I absolutely would recommend. So as I'm going to go through and start sketching out the individual fauna examples, let's talk about the different kind of animals that can live in a city. And again, I'm going to split these into three categories. Every animal that will live in a city will have to adapt to the way that it lives for the inhabitants. So it means that you don't rely on the general predator-prey relationship or ambient relationship of a lot of things in nature. They will all respond in some way to people, and so we can categorize them in three categories: scavengers, symbiotics, and parasites. A scavenger animal will live on the outskirts. It will eat the waste or detritus or the dead that are left behind by the population of the city. The symbiotic creatures have a relationship that is mutually beneficial between the living inhabitants, the humans or the humanoids, and themselves. And the parasites have a one-way relationship. They generally try to go undetected, and they feed off of the population itself. Scavengers in real life are categorized into one of three subclasses, which is primary scavengers, secondary scavengers, and facultative scavengers. We're talking on whether they rely on scavenging or whether they generally hunt but can scavenge. Symbiotics, I've categorized them into whether they provide food, whether they provide protection, whether they provide status to the humans. And parasites, I've categorized them according to how they manage to avoid being killed, whether they can mimic humans, whether they can appease humans by being cute, or they appear to have a function that they don't fulfill, or whether they attach themselves within or without, like a tick or a worm. So let's have a few examples of those. These are real life examples of all of these different kinds of animals that you can have in your campaign. And when I go through later on and I talk about the specific examples of the fauna that I've used in this map, I'll point out which of them fall into which categories on this map. So now that I've gone through, I've finished doing the sketches of the animals themselves. I've done the biomes, I've watercolored in the sea and the fungal areas, and I've divided the city into its different sections, I'm going to go through and I'm going to start labeling things. As always, label before you draw. It's going to make things a lot easier to read. So I'm going to do the labels first, and then I'm going to go through and I'm going to draw the building blocks. Again, I'm going to use different thicknesses of ink in order to differentiate between them so that later on, the focus, the eye is drawn to the sketches of the animals first, and then the specific dangerous areas like the sea and the fungal grove. Then, if you want to search for details after that, you can find them if you search for them. So let's talk about the storytelling aspects of having flora and fauna in your fantasy city. Because it's not something that I would personally think of as being the first thing to create. I tend to rely on planning details, on natural landscapes, on architecture, or city structures. The intended physical structure of a city rather than what lives within it. And even then, when I think of what lives within a city, I tend to think of the intentional inhabitants rather than the flora and the fauna, the weeds and the scavengers. And so when you create a city like this, it is important to note that it is a background detail. It is something that allows you to add to the world building, that allows you to color the city, that allows you to make more intense descriptions of their surroundings, but they can be central to your game and its challenges. So let's talk about how you can bring it in. So the first and easiest way to bring flora and fauna into your game is in the immersion of it. We love immersion, yay! It's in how you can create descriptions. It's how you can differentiate between the different seasons in your world so that something is different every time they come to a given city. If the trees are in bloom, or if the waterways are choked with algae in the summertime, then that's something that you can use to add to the description to make it feel more alive and even add different elements to the role playing. And on that note, it adds to the second way that you can bring flora and fauna in, which is in quest elements. Because if things change from year to year, you can bring that in. If algae clogs the sewers or the waterways every year, then you can have quests that are focusing on removing a particular kind of vermin that infiltrates the sewers every single year, every summer. It's something that they figure out. It's a low-level quest, but it's something that you can use to get coin. Or you can have ideas of, how parasites infiltrate the city, how they're animals that mimic, humanoid appearance, how you can try to find them and get rid of them, whether they thief things like crows and ravens take shiny objects, so that you can have a quest that isn't based on thieves being human or even intentional. It's just something that it's a different kind of challenge they need to bring in, maybe make your druid feel a bit more useful. And it can tie in, of course, to the wider world as well. But the most important and interesting way that you can bring your flora and fauna into the world is in environmental challenges. Now, we talk about environmental challenges in dungeons, which is when you create a chamber, you can have something for them to overcome or encounter, which is difficult or dangerous for them to be in proximity with. But in terms of a city, when they're living their day to day, you can bring that in as a long-term challenge. If an environmental problem exists throughout the city, then it's something that they will have to encounter day in and day out, even if they're unaware of it. If a parasite begins to infect the members of the city unbeknownst, if it's a kind of brainworm, or if it's a kind of hypnotic tick, then that's something that you can be aware of. If there are predators in the city picking the people off one by one, then that's a quest right there. You can have inconveniences like weeds growing or algae or even allergens, which lower the speed or the abilities of your players. But you can also tie in how your players' own efforts can be hampered by the natural world. If they're gathering valuables, you can have something steal it. If they are trying to sneak through the city, you can have the birds try to shoo them away, as they do in real life. Swooping magpies are something that we all deal with. What happens when you give that magpie a 6-inch stainless steel beak? There are all kinds of different ways that you can tie in flora and fauna into your game in ways that are more than just description. So I encourage you to be creative and understanding that and creating your own tool to help you remember and visualize what your city looks like can start with a naturalist map like this one. So I'm most of the way through this city of Axiom now. And so let's take this opportunity to talk about Axiom as a whole. We can use it as a case study so you can see what I've drawn in here and how you can explore your own worlds. So let's bring up the overview of Axiom here. Now you can see the different areas. I haven't labeled them on this, but you don't really need to. On the left-hand side, you've got the sea and the float, which is a collection of boats. You've got the central acropolis, you've got the areas around it, and on the right-hand side, you've got the abandoned outer area of the city with the fungus invading from the north. Now, there are different sections of the city as well, but not particularly important, because what we're going to do is we're going to add in the descriptions of the fauna that I've illustrated here. And as you can see, if we're just talking about what those animals are, what function that they serve for themselves, and what relationship they have with the inhabitants, you can see that we've got a fair spread of different kinds of fauna. We've got different kinds of scavengers, we've got parasites, we've got a symbiotic relationship with a wild animal, which fleshes out the world building and lends itself to the immersion in the game. And so you can see the different creatures that I've gotten from the Fluffy Folio. Thanks to the Fluffy Folio for that. A quick description shows exactly what function they serve. So you can see that a symbiotic relationship doesn't necessarily need to be a domesticated relationship. For instance, I wouldn't call a beehive a domesticated animal, but it does serve a function that benefits both people. So in this case, the sand things on the bottom eat the detritus. They can pose a threat individually. But generally speaking, to the city as a whole, the fact that they eat the detritus is good for the sand things and good for the people. It removes waste from the people and it provides sustenance for the sand things. And there are explanations like that for all of the individual creatures. So when you're fleshing out what your city has, delineate it by what their relationship is with the inhabitants, what function that they serve, how it impacts the city as a whole, rather than individual case-by-case basis. And so we're coming to the end now. I love doing my naturalist maps. I love doing the illustrations of them. I know that they're very satisfying to watch. And so as we come to the end now, I'll give a few notes that I have on this map so that you can use them as improvements on your own. I deliberately didn't use any descriptions on the exterior of the map like I haven't done on all of the other naturalist maps that I've done, so that it's more eye-catching and you've got a better understanding of where things fit in. I do think that although I deliberately decided not to use different ink colors on the labels so that your eye would be drawn to the illustrations rather than the background, it does make it a little difficult to read. So I think if you're making your own, I would recommend using a colored pen, probably a red or even a purple, so that you can see the labels more easily and differentiate. You don't want it to be so crowded that the eye is overwhelmed when it looks at it, but certainly adding in the different color for at least the labels for the sketches and the major areas, the suburbs or the biomes, would be something that I would recommend for your own projects. And the last thing to do, now that we've started with doing this, the painting of the backgrounds and the biomes, and then sketching out the individual fauna, and then going through doing the labels, and then the city blocks, is to paint in the border of the map and then the title. I've gone with something that I tend to generally do, which is just the freehand painted border, which you can do in your own map, but I've made the title and the compass more evocative as well. And now we're done. We've finished at the end the full map of the city of Axiom. It's focusing on what lives there as examples, but it can be used to navigate the city entirely. You've got the best of both worlds. It's not overwhelming to look at. You can find the details that you need without needing to read through entire paragraphs. And you can see that the paintings come out really nicely using the different pens, using the different colors, using the different thicknesses and the different inks. Overall, definitely a successful map. I hope that Complex Creatures is very happy with this. I wanted to thank them again for working with me on that. And I wanted to thank the Fluffy Folio for the use of their creatures for this particular map as well. I've put links to both Conflux and Fluffy Folio in the description below if you want to check out what they've got, if you want to use them in your own worlds. If you want to check out the written version of this tutorial, I've got it on my website. The link is also in the description. Unlike we normally do, this map is not available for free on the Patreon because it is a commission. I've got a different map available there instead that you can use in your own campaigns. It's free to download, but while you're there, if you do want to support what we do, if you want to help me get more materials, want to support me in what I'm doing, please do. As always, if you have any questions, if you want to discuss anything, if you want to request anything, I try to reply to every comment on my videos, or you can join the Red Quills Discord channel, in which you can find other people who make maps, you can exchange ideas, you can show updates, and you can talk to the wider map making community. As always, thank you for watching this episode of the Red Quills. I hope that the last few weeks of creating city maps has been helpful to everyone. I'm moving forward with a new set of videos from next week. We're going to finish up the year with a quick series, which I'm very excited about, but I don't want to give any spoilers. So I will see you all next week. Thank you for watching. Happy mapping.